When the RMS Titanic departed from Southampton, England on the 10th of April 1912, there were 2,240 passengers and crew on board. Along with those passengers and crew were a range of animals, including chickens, roosters, a yellow canary, rats and mice, plus cats to deal with those, and an estimated 12 pet dogs. However, just 4 days into the voyage, the Titanic would become known as one of the greatest maritime disasters in history. This is the story of the pets on board the Titanic. Whilst most of the animals on board the Titanic perished, there were some lucky escapes from animals that should have been on board but avoided making the fateful journey in the first place. They included Jenny. Jenny was the Titanic's mascot, and she had the important role of dispatching the rats and mice that inhabited the luxury liner. Just before Titanic was due to set sail, Jenny was moved to her sister ship, the Olympic, because she was pregnant and subsequently gave birth a week before Titanic left port. Another lucky escape was Ben, a wolfhound owned by the Titanic's captain, Edward Smith. Ben was visiting Smith, but had to disembark before the ship left Southampton, leaving with Captain Smith's sister. Then there were 100 foxhounds that were due to be transported to America by the owner, Charles Moore. And Charles wanted to introduce the English tradition of fox hunting to Washington, D.C. But Moore changed his plan at the very last minute, and this meant those 100 foxhounds never actually made it on board. But what of the pets we do know that were on the Titanic when she left for that fateful journey? Well, there's little information relating to the cats that were on the ship. However, sources indicate there were at least 12 pet dogs on board, as they had to have their own ticket to travel. Of the dogs that there are records of, these include a King Charles Spaniel and an old Airedale Terrier that were owned by the children of William and Lucille Carter. And the children pleaded with their parents to let their dogs stay with them in their staterooms, but they were told no. There was also a Chow Chow who belonged to a stockbroker called Harry Anderson. And there was also a champion French bulldog called Gaiman. And he was owned by a man called Robert Williams Daniel, who at the time apparently paid £150 for Gaiman, which is well over £13,500 by today's standards. Now, the richest passenger on board the Titanic was John Jacob Astor. He was an American businessman, he was a real estate developer and investor, as well as a writer. And he was travelling with his young wife Madeline, who was 5 months pregnant, along with his dog Kitty, who was another Airedale Terrier. Now, although the Titanic had very strict rules about all the passengers' dogs being kept in the dog kennels, there were some female first-class passengers that snuck their smaller pooches into their staterooms. This included 2 Pomeranians. One was called Lady, owned by Margaret Bechstein Hayes. And there was also a Pekingese called Sun Yat-sen, owned by Henry and Myra Sleeper Harper. There was also another dog that was snuck in called Frou Frou, owned by Helen Bishop. Records show that some of these ladies were conspicuous with these little dogs. And this resulted in complaints from other passengers. And one such passenger actually wrote of his annoyance about these ladies walking around with their little dogs in a letter that was posted when Titanic made her last stop at a port in Ireland. That letter arrived once the ship had sunk. The dogs that were housed in the kennels were cared for by the ship's crew, and they were walked daily around the lower decks of this unsinkable ship. It's said that first-class passenger Anne Isham visited her beloved Great Dane daily in the kennels. On the 14th of April at 11:30 p.m, a lookout saw an iceberg coming out of the slight haze dead ahead, and they rang the warning bell.
Iceberg right ahead! On the starboard!
The Titanic was put into reverse and the ship turned sharply but struck the iceberg, grazing the ship along the side under the water as she passed. Just an hour after hitting the iceberg, a haphazard evacuation began. Helen Bishop was told she had to leave her stateroom, but she couldn't take Frou Frou along. Helen pleaded with the ship's officer, and Frou-Frou is said to have grabbed onto Helen's dress as if to stop Helen from leaving her. Helen was told to go, and Helen said it was one of the biggest regrets of her life that she had to leave Frou-Frou behind. Eyewitness accounts suggest at some point the dogs in the kennels must have been let out because dogs were seen running up and down the decks amongst the panic. Some even suggest it was John Jacob Astor that had let the dogs out of the kennels. Over 1,500 people lost their lives in the disaster, and of all the animals that were on board, only 3 survived. These were the 2 Pomeranians and Sun Yat-sen, as they were small enough to be carried by their owners and to sit on their laps in the lifeboats. It's said that Anne Isham was all set with a lifeboat and was about to be lowered down, but a ship's officer wouldn't allow her Great Dane on board. Legend has it that Miss Isham refused to leave her dog and got out of the lifeboat. According to reports, days after the Titanic had sunk, a passenger ship reported seeing a woman's body floating in the ocean with her frozen arms wrapped around the body of a large dog. It is believed that this was Anne, as she was one of only 4 female first-class passengers that lost their lives in the disaster. However, the woman's body was never formally identified, and some even dispute whether Anne had a dog. Regardless of whether this was Anne or not, this sight would have been heartbreaking, and the story of the animals on the Titanic highlights the continued significance of human-animal relationships, a bond that endures today.